How's everyone? How's everyone doing? Oh, there we go. Right, I'm going to get this off. Right, welcome to Toronto. This is going to be my talk on adapting. For those of you new to these, I'll go into the sometimes slightly bonkers world of badly fitting ships and getting away with it. This is also my first time in Canada, so as you can see, I've dressed for the part. Someone has actually mistaken me for a Mountie today, so that was pretty satisfying. So, I'm Baltic 1. I'm a bit of vet of 13 years in this game, and I'm also a member of Pandemic Horde. If you enjoy aggressively feeding, or if you have a spare spy ult, feel free to give an application today. Now, I'm going to give you a war. Well, many of you recognise my name. It comes from a doctrine that many people may have flown in. That's not actually something I cooked up. They just named it after me because I was stubborn and flew the thing constantly. So it was something that they had to sort of name after me, apparently. Now, I'm going to give you a warning. I take absolutely no responsibility for anyone actually following this advice. So don't blame me if you get kicked from your lines because you decided to turn a Titan into super heavy, fast tackle. It does, but don't blame me for that one. So, ship fitting. It's a complicated business. You've got thousands of mods to choose from, dozens upon dozens of ships, so there's an awful lot of ways to make an absolute mess of things and accidentally go down in history, as this poor sod did. This is the original My Raven was fitted with the following. A man that went down in legend for all the wrong reasons. Now, this tends to put off people from trying new things because they don't want to be that guy. But I'm of the sort of like opinion that it's perfectly fine to be that guy. At least they know you. And this tends to sort of like bring about people thinking, well, I'm just going to copy what everybody else does. And that doubly goes down for when it comes down to alliance fits. Although there's very good reasons to follow the fitting of your alliance leaders. Please follow the fitting advice of your alliance leaders in fleets. Now, we win in large organisations, you've got people that actually sit there in theory craft for pretty much the entire time that they're not fighting on the battlefield. And it can be irritating to them when you've got some numpty that shows up in a ship that doesn't exactly fit the fleet composition. Well, let's face it, I'm talking about me here. But for me, fitting ships to do things that they're not supposed to be doing is all the fun in this game. And a lot of people think when it comes to adapting, it just means picking another ship to counter another ship. For example, Caracal's taking on frigates. So, swapping around fittings on a single hull to meet new challenges is not something you see an awful lot. So, I'm going to go through the last half a year of me adapting my Megathrons to do things they probably shouldn't be doing. And we're going to start off with the fleet. Now, fleets are probably the first thing you think about when joining an alliance. It's the most obvious thing that you see. And more than likely, everybody in this room has been in trouble at some point for bringing the wrong thing or fitting the wrong mod on a ship. I mean, let's see show of hands of who's done that. I'll just say, everybody who hasn't put their hand up is a damn liar. Now, the last thing the FC wants is some idiot showing up in a random ship. So, of course, I am that idiot, so I'm going to show you what I got away with. The first up is Ferrox Fleet. Now, this is one of the more fun fleets I've been on for quite some time. Now, the general idea behind them is straight up throw them at the enemy, blast away, in a classic sort of meat grinder, where the losers decide by who runs out of bodies first, or ammo. Firm favourite of leadership the world over throughout time. Now, since Christmas, Horde and Test have been throwing these at each other over, well, keep stars in high sec. And who knew that fighting wars in high sec could be so much fun? I certainly didn't. So quickly took up what's called the Ferrothon. It's not the prettiest fit, I'll agree. But the problem of getting an armour tank and battleship to become a shield tank and battlecruiser that won't cap itself out, it requires a fair bit of creativity. First issue is speed. Now, I've got a very, very simple rule for when doing this. The ship must either match or be better than the fleet that it's taken part in. It's a golden rule that it has to be that. And warp speed is one of the biggest problems that you can find with bigger ships, because it impacts the entire fleet. So what I did here was I used some of those valuable rig slots with a pair of hyperspatial rigs, and now the Ferox are slowing me down. Next up, we shield tank this armour tank ship, which is fairly easy done, even if there's not a lot of room to fit one in there. And what we end up with is, let's face it, it's not a fantastically tanked ship for a battleship, but it's in the rough ballpark of what a Ferox would be if it's a little bit fatter. Now, you'll also notice I've put in tracking instead of max damage. That's generally because when it comes to railguns, the bigger you go, the more likely it's going to miss the target and probably hit the sun. Rails aren't that good at tracking. I then had to make sure that I didn't cap this thing out when you're running around on the battlefield, as the Ferox do. Fortunately, I've got all these low slots to play with that I'm not using. So, I fit in 3 cap mods there, and it doesn't quite get you to complete cap stability. But experience tells me you're not going to be shooting them guns all the time. So, in practice, it's got more cap stability than the Ferox it flies with. So, if anyone's going to cap out, it's going to be them. Now, of course, being such a blatant target, it does come with 1 or 2 drawbacks. The biggest pain is that people will naturally want to kill the big, shiny thing. Being the odd one out, though, does come with an advantage which many don't really think about. Because a lot of people, when they take on a Ferox fleet, will have a battlecruiser only overview. Yes. So I suddenly become both the most obvious ship on the field and also completely invisible, which has saved me a few times. Now, one of the more surprising advantages it brings is the much bigger cargo hold. Now, there is a bit of logic behind this one. How many people here have found themselves in a surprise structure op where you've not had the ammo? Guess what I've stuffed in that thing? Lots of ammo for the fleet. The fleet love me now. Alternatively, I can fit a whole load of cap boosters in there. The Logi Wing like me now. They're going to keep me alive. Another thing that I like to fit on these is some rep drones. So your tackle wing likes you as well. So in a strange way, this ship has managed to master hearts and minds for the fleet. So in a roundabout way, they always kind of want you there, in a strange way. But it's not always this hard to get yourself adapted. So, for example, you've got a Baden fleet. It's an armour battleship fleet. So there's not much room for shenanigans in this one, really, is there? All you need to do is just take your ordinary Megathron. I find that a little bit boring. So I decided to do something I've always wanted to try. I strapped lasers to it, and I called it the Laserthron. And yes, lasers really do make everything cooler. This one managed to go several fleets before anyone actually noticed what I'd done. It wasn't until I started firing purple that people suddenly realised, oh, hold on a second. Now, the fit for this one is very simple. I took the Abaddon fit, and I just super glued it to the Megathron. Absolutely no changes required. Now, first up is the all-important Megapulse lasers. Now, these are cap-hungry, even on the Mars ships. So that does mean you need to keep them properly fed. And this is done with a mix of cap batteries, a booster, and a recharger. Now, with the cap problem solved, it's just a matter of copying the tank over. And there were two things that stood out to me about this fit. The first is just how easy it was to get lasers to work. And the second one is that the buff to Abaddon damage was really needed. I was consistently coming out on top for damage, and that shouldn't have been happening. But fleets aren't everything. Home defense is probably where the majority of your content is going to be found. It's also a lot of the fun ones. Unfortunately, this generally means fast, small stuff, which is the exact opposite of what I fly. So, this causes, today's matter of kitey, well, bullshit, basically, is one of the biggest problems that I face. And one of the absolute massive problems I faced came from these little buggers. Cormorant fleets. Extremely expendable, and extremely long range, and extremely fast for a battleship. Now, these tend to roam around in fleets of 20 to 150 ships. And they're an absolute nightmare to engage if you're using a blaster boat. It just means you can't really catch up to them, as I've tried a lot of times. So I came up with a solution. I basically take a brick, strap some long-range guns to it, and you get the Corm and get it. Now, the Tanga is straightforward. You plate it up. Now, in fights like this, buffer is way more important than tank. Well, sorry, than active reps, because they'll just burst through your repping. The reppings are 425 rails. These give you the range you need, but they do have big issues with tracking, as I've said, which is where the mids come in. 2 tracking computers, generally with the ship's bonuses as well, and some light use of drugs. Gives you the tracking that you can grab hold of them. You also have two seaboards in there, so you can actually lock them fast enough, or, as it turns out, keep up with the range that you're fighting at. Because when this thing maxes out its range, the tactical map isn't actually large enough to cover it all. Which essentially means my zone of death is... It's unbelievably funny. So, of course, ships like this do come with large drawbacks. And this one comes with 2 very big ones. Much like a brick, it doesn't move too well. So don't expect to be chasing things down. So it's more or less relegated to gear camps or short trips around space. Unless you like slow boating through multiple bubble gates, but then people do enjoy mining, so there's probably somebody out there. The other drawback comes from the rails when up against very fast, small ships, such as frigates, well, interceptors. Now, you have the range to hit them, but sometimes you just can't apply the damage, and that's entirely down to the very spooky thing called tracking. Now, some of this subject does sound like the title of a very bad 90s action movie. And it's probably one of the least understood mechanics of the game. And I do apologise, but we're going to have to do just a little bit of maths here. So to put simply, it works out that your turret can well track the moving target. The important thing is that you need to look at this red line, the angular velocity. Now, fortunately, you don't need a binder full of graphs or memorize everything from a custom spreadsheet. The game does actually do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And one of the things I will advise you in your overview settings is to get the angular velocity on there. So let's say there's a frigate with an RS of 0.0025 at 90 kilometers range. I've got a 50-50 chance of hitting this target. Double the RS, drops down to about 9%. How did I work this out? All turrets have a tracking number. Now, this number is different depending on skills, your fit, if you've got implants, on-grid boosters, or if you've munched a few drugs recently. Now, it's a very complicated thing, and there are tools, thankfully, you can Google to help you understand them better than I can possibly explain, because it just warps my mind. EVE Online Turret Calculator is a great one. And like many things, the more you practice, the more that you get good at judging if you can hit the target or not. As many things in EVE. Now, complicated mathematics aside, this ship is an awful lot of fun. The comms might not agree with that, but when it comes to home defense and just camping and gating, this is an amazing ship. But when it comes to home defense, there is a lot of running around and chasing involved. So this is where this one comes in, the Nanothron. Now, this is by far my favorite Megathron and has been for pretty much the past 6 years or so that I've been concentrating on them. And who can't like flying a battleship that thinks it's a cruiser? Now, this is the modern version of the old Harpythron. And for those that can't remember what a Harpythron is, that was a Megathron that was designed to be a harpy in Harpy Fleet. Yes, it worked, and yes, it did die. Now, and before you pod hunters start looking around for me, I'm not running the Harpy Fit because that was 2 billion. This is the toned down version. The most important thing, naturally, is warp speed. This ship will beat most cruisers out there, which is an issue sometimes because I'm sometimes in the very strange situation of being the first thing on grid, which is not something a battleship tends to be used to. Now, to get that speed doesn't need a huge amount. All you have to do is sacrifice all of your rigs. The second most important thing is align time. Now, this means that you don't find yourself left on a gate when cruisers warp off. Now, on paper, this doesn't match a cruiser's align time. In practice, this thing can outpace stabbers and keep up with an awful lot of frigates and destroyers. The reason for this isn't entirely clear, but I'm sure it's simply down to because most people are really bad at this game. It's the only explanation I've got. Now, the tank is admittedly 3 mid-slots. Now, of course, it means a shield tank, and in battleship terms, it does make it just that little bit squishy. It also comes with cap mods in this particular fit, so I can run around forever, running the micro warp drive, so I can chase things down on grid. But it's optional. I can fit in more tracking, I can fit in more damage. It really depends on what I'm doing at the time. And finally, it's like the all-important damage, is blasters. Now, altogether, this is a ridiculous ship and a lot of fun to fly, but there's always room for a little bit more madness, such as the Polarthron. For those times when you want to evaporate whatever is unlucky enough you get in your way. This, of course, means polarized blasters, which comes with the hefty penalties of 0 resist. So with great power comes great squishability. The weapons are almost criminally underused outside of things like bombers. So thankfully for me, that means these weapons of mass destruction are incredibly cheap. Now, all of these fits so far are, for me at least, comfortably within the Megathron's range. More difficult is something like a Caracal fleet, believe it or not. Now, the problem with this fleet is the speed that they move at. Asking a Megathron to, at the very least, match them is an incredibly hard ask for the ship. It's not impossible, though. And for this, I need to fire up Pyfer. Now, Caracals top out at 1,900 meters a second. And as we can see here, this Megathron beats that. Just. It does come at a cost, though. Quite a hefty one. To get up to speed requires high grades, the best quality drugs, and a swig of quaff. And all of that comes to 2.5 billion at least to do the job of a 30 to 50 million-esque ship. So the question probably is it worth it? Probably not, but I've always been strange like that. Now, all of this is just 6 months of farting around with just one ship. Now, it is a ship I've been tinkering with for 7+ years now, and there's absolutely no sign of running out of new ways to fly it and, well, new ways to break it. And this is something anyone can do with any ship you fancy the look of. Just be warned. It can sometimes go incredibly wrong. So, unfortunately, I don't have... Oh, I've got 5 minutes left. No, I'll skip that one. So, if anybody wants to ask me questions, I'll be hanging around. There'll be the big party tonight. Who's interested in that one? Yeah. For everybody that's watching at home, well, bad to be you, I suppose. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.